Below is a version built to sound natural in voiceover, stay within your niche, and feel updated, so I really thought I was done talking about this story. I said it out loud. I told myself, alright, enough. We covered the photos, we covered the resignation, we covered the fallout, and we can leave this alone for a while. And then, like clockwork, more comes out, because what started as one of those stories people wanted to brush off as gossip has turned into a full media mess with new reporting, more pressure on the people involved, and now even Mike Vrabel finally speaking publicly after staying quiet while all of this kept getting bigger. ESPN previously reported new behind-the-scenes details about coordinated responses and the Athletic's internal review, while more recent reporting says Vrabel has since called it a personal and private matter and, according to Page 6, now plans to seek counseling and step away from the team during day 3 of the draft. So yeah, we're back here again. If you've been following this story with me, you already know why people cannot stop talking about it. And if you're just tuning in, don't worry, because I'm going to walk you through this in order. And then I'm going to tell you why this got even messier than a lot of people expected. If you want every update on this kind of NFL offseason chaos, go ahead and subscribe, turn on notifications, and let's get into it. For anybody new to this, here's the fast version. Page 6 published photos of Patriots head coach Mike Vrabel and NFL reporter Dianna Russini together at Ambiente in Sedona, Arizona, a high-end adults-only resort. The images and follow-up coverage described them dining together, being at the pool and hot tub, and spending time on a rooftop area. While both maintained the interaction was innocent and part of a larger group context. Page 6 also reported eyewitnesses who said they did not see the larger group Russini later referenced. That alone would have been enough to make this a big sports media story. But the reason it got so much bigger is because Russini was not just any reporter. She was one of the top NFL insiders at The Athletic, and Mike Vrabel was not just some random source. He was a head coach she had actively covered. Front Office Sports then reported that The Athletic was probing the situation, that she had been sidelined, and that the company wanted proof supporting the explanation that there had been a larger group with them. Then ESPN pushed the story even further with reporting that described what was happening behind the scenes. According to ESPN's reporting, this was no longer just about awkward photos or a bad look. It became a question about whether public statements had been coordinated and whether the company trusted the explanation it was being given. And I think that is the part that made this go from scandal to full-blown credibility crisis. Because look at the sequence here. First, the photos come out. Then the public defense comes out. Then The Athletic initially backs her publicly. Then the company starts digging more seriously. Then Russini resigns. ESPN later reported that the internal situation involved requests for evidence, direct appeals higher up the chain, and concern inside the organization about what had really happened. That is not the timeline of a story that quietly goes away, and this is where I think a lot of people had to stop and look at this differently. Because if this was always as harmless as the public statements made it sound, why did it keep getting worse instead of fading out? That is the question hanging over all of this. One thing that also mattered was where the photos came from and how they moved around. Front Office Sports reported that the pictures were shopped to multiple outlets before Page 6 published them. That tells you there were people who thought this story had enough heat to travel, and once it hit the internet, there was no keeping it small. Then came the next major blow, Russini's resignation. ESPN reported that she resigned from The Athletic while the New York Times-owned outlet was investigating the matter. That move alone told people this was serious, because if everything was headed toward a clean explanation, resignation is not usually the move that calms people down. Now, I want to be fair here. There is a difference between what has been reported and what people online are assuming. The reporting supports that the situation created internal concern, professional fallout, and questions about judgment. It does not give the public every private fact people on social media want. And that matters. Because once a story like this gets moving, people start filling in blanks with whatever version sounds the most dramatic. But even if you strip away all the online guessing, the documented part is still a huge story. A major reporter is photographed with a head coach she covers. Her employer first defends her, then investigates. A trade and access conversation is already hanging over the story. The photos were reportedly circulated to multiple outlets. She gets sidelined, then resigns. ESPN reports deeper internal fallout. And then Vrabel, after staying quiet, finally has to address it publicly. That is why people are still talking about it, and Vrabel speaking matters more than some people want to admit. For a while, one of the most striking parts of this story was that Russini's career took the visible hit, while Vrabel stayed mostly silent. More recent reporting says he finally addressed it as a personal and private matter, and said he had difficult conversations with his family and with people in the organization. Then Page 6 reported another turn today, saying he plans to seek counseling and step away during day 3 of the draft while staying involved remotely. Now, whether you believe that helps him, hurts him, or simply confirms how serious this got inside his own life, it changes the tone of the story. Because this is no longer a situation where one person absorbed all the public fallout while the other just kept moving like nothing happened. At least publicly, that is no longer true. There is also another strange layer to this whole thing, and I'm mentioning it because people online would bring it up whether I did or not. Page 6 also reported that Russini was involved in helping rescue an elderly man and his dog after a car accident in Wyckoff, New Jersey. That story landed right in the middle of all this fallout, and naturally, people had opinions about the timing. But whatever anyone thinks about that timing, it was still reported as a real good deed. And I think it is fair to say both things can exist at once. Someone can be in the middle of a damaging scandal and still do something commendable in real life. Now let me zoom out, because this is the part that keeps bringing people back. The core issue here was never just, were these two seen together? Sports media is full of access, relationships, private conversations, off-camera sourcing, and reporters spending time around people they cover. Everybody knows that. The reason this blew up is because once the photos hit, every part of the professional relationship started getting re-examined through that new lens. That is the real damage, because after that, every report connected to the Patriots starts getting looked at differently. Every source relationship starts feeling shakier. Every editor inside that building suddenly has to ask whether the appearance problem is now bigger than the reporting value. And once that happens, trust gets expensive. That is true even before you get into the most explosive behind-the-scenes claims from ESPN's reporting, and I think that is why this story had such a long life online. It had everything. It had sports, media, marriage, access journalism, leaked photos, internal corporate pressure, and public silence at exactly the moment people expected answers. It also had escalation. Every few days there was another turn. First the photos, then the defense, then the internal review, then the sidelining, then the resignation, then the behind-the-scenes reporting, then Vrabel finally speaking. Then today's report about counseling and stepping away on day 3. That is exactly the kind of story cycle that keeps a commentary audience hooked, because the story refuses to sit still. So where does this go from here? That depends on 3 things. The first is whether anything else comes out from the internal review side. ESPN's reporting made it clear there was a lot more happening behind closed doors than the public knew at first. If any more findings become public, that could reopen everything. The second is Vrabel, because now that he has finally spoken, people are going to watch what he does next even more closely. One short public comment can calm a fire for a day, but it does not erase the bigger questions people have been asking. And the third is whether this ends here or keeps bleeding into football coverage. Because if the football side of this story starts overlapping again with reporting, sourcing, or roster rumors, the whole thing gets new life immediately. That is why I still don't think this story is really about one set of photos anymore. It is about fallout. It is about what happens when optics collide with access. It is about how fast an employer can go from defending a person to distancing itself. And it is about how a story that some people wanted to call gossip ended up forcing public statements, internal review, resignation, and now a response from the coach himself. So no, I am not going to sit here and promise this is the last time I talk about it, because every time somebody says that, this story finds one more way to get stranger. What I will say is this: the public version of this story and the real version of this story have not felt like the same thing for a while now. And every new report has made that gap look bigger, not smaller. So now I want to hear from you. Do you think Vrabel saying something publicly helps calm this down, or do you think this story still has one more major turn left in it? Drop your take in the comments. If you want more NFL offseason drama, media fallout, and the stories everybody else is dancing around, subscribe, turn on notifications, and I'll catch you in the next one.